The U.S. government has executed 10 people this year, the most since 1896. For the first time in U.S. history, the government has executed more people than all of the 50 states. And the number of federal prisoners put to death this year, 10, is the highest since President Grover Cleveland's second term in office, according to the Death Penalty Information Center. The group's report published Wednesday said 7 state-level executions have been carried out in 2020, a 37-year low. There were also fewer new death sentences imposed this year, 18, than any other year since the Supreme Court struck down all existing capital punishment statutes in the U.S. In 1972, the report said. Before this year, according to the group's database, there had been no federal executions in the United States since 2003. And only 3 federal inmates had been executed since the federal death penalty was reinstated in 1988. No president in the 20th or 21st century before this year presided over double-digit executions in any calendar year. The Trump administration has carried out 10 in the space of 5 months, Robert Dunham, executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center and the report's lead author, told CNN. You'd have to go back to 1896 and President Grover Cleveland's second presidency to find this many federal civilian executions in a single year, Dunham added. In addition, no administration since Cleveland's first presidency has carried out multiple executions during a transition. At the time, the transition period lasted from November to March. Compared to 2.5 months now, Dunham explained, traditionally, out of respect for the incoming administration, and because executions are a matter of life and death. Executions weren't carried out during a transition period, Dunham said. The report noted there were several anomalies with the U.S. government's actions this year. By the end of 2020, the federal government had conducted more civilian executions in 5 months than any other presidency in the 20th or 21st centuries. Performed the first executions by a lame duck president in more than a century. And scheduled more executions than had ever occurred in a presidential transition period in the history of the United States, the report said. 3 more federal executions are scheduled to be carried out before President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration on January 20. Racial disparities in this year's executions were similar to previous trends, the report said, with almost half of the defendants executed being people of color and 76% of the executions for the deaths of white victims. Racism has always infected the use of the death penalty, and this year is no exception. The death penalty, as the most severe punishment, must be part of the efforts to address racism in the criminal legal system as a whole, said Ngozi Ndulaway, DPIC's Senior Director of Research and Special Projects and the lead author of Enduring Injustice: The Persistence of Racial Discrimination in the U.S. Death Penalty, which DPIC released in September. The return to federal executions. The Trump administration's decision to resume federal executions after a 16-year hiatus was announced in July 2019 by now outgoing Attorney General William Barr. Barr at the time said the government was moving to seek justice against the worst criminals and bring relief to victims and family members. According to the Justice Department statement, Barr directed the Federal Bureau of Prisons to adopt an execution protocol using a single drug injection of pentobarbital, replacing a 3-drug procedure observed in the past. Since 2010, 14 states have used pentobarbital in over 200 executions in federal courts, including the Supreme Court, have repeatedly upheld the use of pentobarbital in executions as consistent with the 8th Amendment, the statement reads. According to Dunham, the administration's rushed approach to resuming federal executions, particularly with respect to the execution protocol, was to the detriment of public and judicial oversight. Dunham also noted that executions took place during the coronavirus pandemic, as some states issued stays and no state-level executions took place past July 8. Everybody else knew that it was more important to protect the public health than it was to kill prisoners now, who could be executed when it was safe to do so later. Only the federal government moved forward with those executions. And in doing so, the report said, the government's actions contributed to an outbreak of coronavirus in the federal correctional complex in Terre Haute, infected at least 9 members of federal execution teams, and to several lawyers and at least 1 religious advisor contracting COVID-19. The Death Penalty Information Center, Dunham explained, doesn't have a stance on whether the death penalty should or shouldn't exist. The first federal execution of 2020 was that of Daniel Lewis Lee, a white man convicted of murdering a family of 3, including an 8-year-old girl. The execution took place on July 14 in Indiana after the Supreme Court overrode a lower court order temporarily blocking it. Most recently, 2 black men, Brandon Bernard and Alfred Bourgeois, were executed on December 10 and 11, respectively. Bernard, 40, was the youngest person to be executed in the United States in nearly 70 years, according to DPIC, and was put to death for a crime committed when he was 18. His case drew the attention of celebrities and politicians, including Kim Kardashian West, who called on President Donald Trump to commute his sentence, and the Reverend Jesse Jackson. The bigger picture federal executions, though they may get more attention this year, are a fraction of the larger picture, according to Dunham. In the United States, there are only 52 people currently on federal death row. There are more than 2,500 people on state death row nationwide. Alabama, Georgia, Missouri and Tennessee each carried out 1 execution in 2028, while Texas executed 3 prisoners. The number of state-level executions in 2020 appears to have been influenced by the closing of courts due to the coronavirus pandemic. But it's in line with long-term trends showing a nationwide move away from the death penalty, Dunham said. A 2020 Gallup poll cited in the report shows the highest level of opposition to the death penalty among Americans since 1966, with 43% against it and 55% in favor of it. The data shows a changing view compared with the 1990s, when support for the death penalty was as high as 80%, and executions reached an all-time high in 1999 with 98 inmates put to death. In March, Colorado became the latest state to abolish the death penalty, bringing the number of states that have done so to 22. Washington, D.C. has also abolished the death penalty. There are 12 states where there have been no executions in the past 10 years, including Louisiana and Utah, which reached that milestone this year. The report said 2020 was also the year of a national reckoning with racial injustice across the board and within the criminal justice system. According to the report, candidates pledging systemic reforms have won prosecutor races in counties across the country that produced a historically disproportionate number of death sentences or executions, such as Los Angeles County in California and Travis County in Texas, among others. Nearly 25% of the population of death row is now in counties where prosecutors say they won't use the death penalty or are going to significantly restrict its use. All of that suggests the numbers will stay low in most of the country going forward, Dunham told CNN. The incoming Biden-Harris administration campaigned on a criminal justice plan that would seek to eliminate the death penalty at the federal level and offer incentives to states to do the same. On Tuesday, more than 40 members of Congress and representatives-elect called on Biden to abolish the federal death penalty on his first day in office. With a stroke of your pen, you can stop all federal executions, prohibit United States attorneys from seeking the death penalty, dismantle death row at FCC Terre Haute, and call for the resentencing of people who are currently sentenced to death, reads the letter, written by Democratic Representative Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. Trump fights for a job that he's not doing as coronavirus rages when the history of the pandemic has written. One of the great mysteries will be what President Donald Trump was doing in the waning days of his presidency as the number of COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. soared past 3,000 each day. The virus spread unchecked, and Congress dithered over the details of an emergency relief package that could be the difference between people being able to eat and being forced to sleep on the streets. This holiday season, Trump ran for president pretending he was the consummate deal-maker, the chief executive who could make things happen with a snap of his fingers. He will go down in history as a president who worsened the grief and tragedy of the most consequential pandemic in 100 years by being contemptuous of masks and the safety precautions designed by his own administration, a man incapable of empathy, who chose to remain cocooned in his White House bubble at a time when leadership would have mattered. For weeks now, Trump has spent most of his time plotting how to nullify the results of President-elect Joe Biden's November victory, as he has fleeced his supporters to pay for a string of ill-conceived lawsuits that were tossed out of court by some of his own judicial appointees. When those efforts failed, he began looking ahead to January 6, when a joint session of Congress meets to formally count the Electoral College results, seeing another opportunity to try and thwart the democratic process in his comfort zone of the Twitter sphere, where he's put out countless false tweets claiming the election was swindle. Trump has been silent about the disturbing hacking campaign, suspected to be tied to Russia, that has endangered U.S. national security. Despite being briefed on the massive data breach by top intelligence officials Thursday, he hasn't said anything about risks to the federal government or how he planned to address it. Senator Mitt Romney, who has been a critic of the president, called the hacking the modern equivalent of almost Russian bombers reportedly flying undetected over the entire country, speaking to SiriusXM on Thursday. And in this setting, not to have the White House aggressively speaking out and protesting and taking punitive action is really quite extraordinary. Biden, without mentioning Trump or his administration, tried to draw the contrast. Our adversaries should know that, as president, I will not stand idly by in the face of cyber assaults on our nation, he said in a statement Thursday. Perhaps most baffling about Trump's disappearance, he has stayed out of the public eye when he could have taken a victory lap following the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's historic authorization of the first COVID-19 vaccine, despite his previous insistence that he should get all the credit for the vaccines because of his effort to push the companies developing them harder than they'd ever been pushed before. But if he emerged to herald a vaccine, he would have also had to acknowledge the suffering afflicting America, both from illness and economic hardship, which he knows will reflect poorly on his legacy. The U.S. now has more than 17 million COVID-19 cases, and the daily number of new coronavirus cases in the United States is nearing 250,000. Trump has also lost his primary talking point about how the economy is coming roaring back. Jobless claims released Thursday showed that 885,000 Americans filed for first-time unemployment benefits last week. Trump issued a sunny tweet glossing over that troubling news Thursday. All-time stock market high. The vaccine and the vaccine rollout are getting the best of reviews. Moving along really well. Get those shots, everyone, the president tweeted, ignoring the fact that scarce vaccine doses are only being allotted to frontline health workers, residents at long-term care facilities, and some government officials. Also, stimulus talks looking very good, he added. Stimulus talks hurtle toward a key deadline, but as Congress tries to structure a COVID relief package that will have bipartisan support in both houses with much-needed aid for millions of unemployed Americans as well as small businesses that are on the brink of collapse, the president has not used his supposed negotiating prowess to get the deal across the finish line, as leaders claim that they are close to a deal. Some progressives and conservatives have formed an unlikely alliance to advocate for increasing the size of the $600 direct payments that are expected to go out to cash-strapped Americans. Republican Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri said he planned to call for a vote Friday on his bill providing direct payments of $1,200 for individuals and $2,400 for families. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent, has also demanded the larger direct payments. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said Thursday evening that conversations are still underway and making progress, and told his members to be prepared to work through the weekend, even though these negotiations should have been completed months ago, as unemployment and other benefits began expiring and worsening cases led to new COVID lockdowns by local officials. McConnell blamed the delays on Democrats. Families across the nation have waited far too long already for another significant dose of assistance, McConnell said in a speech from the Senate floor Thursday. We must not slide into treating these talks like routine negotiations to be conducted at Congress's routine pace. So we need to complete this work, and we need to complete it right away. Republican Senator John Thune, a member of leadership, said the longer negotiations drag on, the harder it becomes to keep members in line, describing the process as a little bit of whack-a-mole. Whack it here, and someone else pops up. There's a lot of interaction between the moving parts of all this, and getting it all lined up at the same time has proven to be pretty hard, the South Dakota Republican said. But I'm still hopeful. Members may need to pass another stopgap measure to keep the government funded and avert a shutdown that would begin at midnight on Friday. But Thune said that Friday midnight deadline had actually been helpful in moving discussions forward. We need the pressure to get this done, and I hope that pressure will continue to build toward midnight tomorrow night, Thune said. A big day for a second coronavirus vaccine. Doses of a second coronavirus vaccine manufactured by Moderna may soon be on their way to Americans after a key advisory panel to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration recommended that the agency grant Moderna emergency use authorization on Thursday. Leaders at the FDA signaled that a decision would come quickly following today's positive advisory committee meeting outcome regarding the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has informed the sponsor that it will rapidly work toward finalization and issuance of an emergency use authorization. FDA Commissioner Dr. Stephen Hahn and Dr. Peter Marks, director of the FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, said in a statement Thursday evening. Hahn and Marks said the agency had also notified the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention so they could prepare for the next steps in the authorization process. Once the FDA signs off, an advisory panel to the CDC will meet to make recommendations about who should get the Moderna vaccine first, and the CDC must sign off on that advice before shots of the Moderna vaccine can be injected into the arms of Americans. FDA officials said they also notified officials at Operation Warp Speed that they were nearing a decision so they can execute their plans for timely vaccine distribution. In a public show of confidence about the vaccine from Pfizer and BioNTech, Vice President Mike Pence and Second Lady Karen Pence will publicly receive the vaccine Friday along with Surgeon General Jerome Adams. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also said they will receive the vaccine in the coming days. The president, who contracted coronavirus in early October, won't get the vaccine until it's recommended by the White House medical team, a White House official told CNN. But as the nation plunges deeper into this critical fight against COVID, he continues to be missing in action, content to let the gears of government function without him. Sorry, folks, your dog doesn't really know what you're talking about. You might think your dog understands every word you say to him, but chances are he isn't hanging on your every word. A new study has found, in spite of their human-like auditory capabilities for interpreting speech sounds, dogs do not hear the subtle differences between words in the way that humans do. A team of researchers has found words are made up of speech sounds which, if changed, alter the entire meaning. For example, dog can turn to dig. Researchers at Ottavio's Lauren University in Budapest measured the brain activity of family dogs using a technique called electroencephalography, which involved taping electrodes to the animals' heads. The researchers played the dogs recorded instruction words they knew, such as sick, similar but nonsense words, suit, and then very different nonsense words, BP. Experts found that dogs, who had not been specifically trained for the experiment, could quickly and clearly tell the difference between the known instruction words and the very different nonsense words. The brain activity is different when they listen to the instructions, which they know, and to the very different nonsense words, which means that dogs recognize these words, lead study author Lila Magyari told CNN. However, the animals did not pay attention to the small differences between known words and similar-sounding nonsense words. Instead, the canine study subjects processed them as the same word. Magyari, a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Ethology at Iotivio's Lauren University, told CNN, dogs are renowned for their auditory capacity and their ability to hear words and sounds well. Magyari said, and they are able to differentiate speech sounds. But it seems like they don't really pay attention to all of the speech sounds, she said, adding that further research could explain why. They may just not realize that all details, the speech sounds, are really important in human speech. If you think of a normal dog, that dog is able to learn only a few of instructions in its life, she said. While our canine companions may not recognize all the nuances, Magyari said that the study also confirmed that dogs actually listen to human speech, as suggested by previous studies, and don't just respond to familiar humans or body language. It really shows that dogs can differentiate the words that they know from nonsense words, she said, noting that family dogs registered brain activity even when listening to instruction words delivered by an unfamiliar voice delivered through a speaker. The findings were published in the Royal Society Open Science Journal on Tuesday. Trump asks Supreme Court to invalidate millions of votes in battleground states. President Donald Trump asked the Supreme Court on Wednesday to block millions of votes from 4 battleground states that voted for President-elect Joe Biden. Trump's request came in a filing with the court asking to intervene in a lawsuit brought by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton seeking to invalidate millions of votes cast in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. The president is being represented by a new attorney, John Eastman, who is known for recently pushing a racist conspiracy theory questioning whether Vice President-elect Kamala Harris was eligible for the role because her parents were immigrants. The move from Trump comes just a day after the High Court denied a request from Pennsylvania Republicans to block certification of the Commonwealth's election results. The one-line order was issued with no noted dissents or comment from any of the 9 justices. The president for weeks has pushed increasingly desperate appeals and baseless conspiracy theories about his second term being stolen. Our country is deeply divided in ways that it arguably has not been seen since the election of 1860, the petition states. There is a high level of distrust between the opposing sides, compounded by the fact that, in the election just held, election officials in key swing states, for apparently partisan advantage, failed to conduct their state elections in compliance with state election law, echoing arguments made by Texas. Trump says the battleground states used the pandemic as an excuse and ignored or suspended the operation of numerous state laws designed to protect the integrity of the ballot. He asks the court to block the states from using constitutionally infirm 2020 election results unless the legislatures of the states review the 2020 election results. He stressed that if any of the states have already appointed electors to the Electoral College using the 2020 election results, the legislatures have the authority to appoint a new set of electors, or the election could go to the House, where Trump would presumably win. Defendant states' electors will determine the outcome of the election, the president states. Alternatively, if defendant states are unable to certify 38 or more electors, neither candidate will have a majority of the total number of electors in the Electoral College, in which case the election would devolve to the House of Representatives under the 12th Amendment. Republicans mixed on lawsuit. Trump has been rallying support from fellow Republicans in Washington, with mixed results. Representative Mike Johnson of Louisiana, a close ally of Trump's, sent an email from a personal email account to every House Republican soliciting signatures for an amicus brief in the long-shot Texas lawsuit. The email said Trump is anxiously awaiting the final list to see who signs on to the amicus brief. One House Republican told CNN he was put off by the Johnson email. "Are we the party of list-making now?" the member asked. Attorney George Conway, once a candidate for Solicitor General for the Trump administration before becoming a prominent critic, said Tuesday that there was no merit to the Texas-led suit and described the effort as the most insane thing yet. For a member of the Supreme Court bar to do this in the Supreme Court of the United States is absolutely outrageous, Conway said on CNN's The Lead with Jake Tapper, in reference to Paxton seeking to block election results. "It's absurd and an embarrassment. And for a public official, let alone any lawyer, let alone any member of the Supreme Court bar, to bring this lawsuit is atrocious." Senator John Cornyn, the senior Texas Republican, told CNN that, "I frankly struggle to understand the legal theory of it. Number one, why would a state, even such a great state as Texas, have a say-so on how other states administer their elections? We have a diffused and dispersed system, and even though we might not like it, they may think it's unfair. Those are decided at the state and local level and not at the national level." Senator Mitt Romney, a Utah Republican, called the Texas lawsuit simply madness and dangerous and destructive of the cause of democracy. "It's just simply madness. The idea of supplanting the vote of the people with partisan legislators is so completely out of our national character that it's simply mad." Lawsuits from the Trump campaign and GOP allies have been dismissed or dropped at a furious pace. Still, the president's staunchest defenders on Capitol Hill are urging him not to concede even after Biden wins the Electoral College vote next week, calling on him to battle it out all the way to the House floor in January. The four states have until 3 p.m. Eastern Time Thursday to respond to the lawsuit. This story has been updated with more details and background. Two North Atlantic right whale newborns have been spotted off the U.S. coast. The year is ending on a positive note for North Atlantic right whales, a critically endangered species, with the spotting of two newborn calves. The right whale is one of the rarest marine mammals in the world, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And there are fewer than 400 of them left in the world. Jessica Powell, a marine mammal biologist for NOAA Fisheries, told CNN. One of the babies, spotted on December 4 off the coast of Cumberland Island, Georgia, was born to Chimenia, who is believed to be 13 years old and is a first-time mom. The second calf, found off Villano Beach in Florida 3 days later, was born to 16-year-old millipede. The right whale's calving season begins in mid-November and runs through mid-April. With a population at such low levels, every individual counts, and it is great to see these two new calves at essentially the beginning of the calving season. Jamison Smith, the executive director of the Blue World Research Institute (BWRI), who captured photos of the babies using drones, told CNN. "It gives us hope that there will be more over the next few months. This species needs all the help they can get so that we might be able to show our grandkids a right whale in the future rather than just tell stories about them." The leading cause for whales' deaths and injuries involve human interaction, including vessel strikes and entanglement in fishing gear, Powell said. "It is illegal for anyone, including boats, drones, surfers, and swimmers, to approach whales within 500 yards without a research permit. It's a species that is struggling and it's essentially all hands on deck to try and save these whales," Powell said. "We advise folks anywhere in the southeast to be really cautious when on the water during the calving season, to look out for calves, slow down around them, and give them space. Whatever we can do to give these whales a fighting chance." This species of whale has also been experiencing an unusual mortality event (UME) over the past 3 years, according to NOAA. Since 2017, at least 32 dead and 13 seriously injured whales have been documented by the organization. In November, biologists mourned the loss of a North Atlantic right whale calf who was discovered dead on the shore of a barrier island off North Carolina. Preliminary reports indicated that the animal died during birth or shortly after, according to Powell, but scientists are waiting for pathology results to confirm the cause of death. Black Lives Matter demonstrators' rescue is this year's most inspiring moment. While 2020 may go down in history as a year that many people would prefer to forget, CNN Heroes viewers took time to weigh in on the top moments worth remembering. They chose Patrick Hutchinson's act of humanity at a Black Lives Matter protest in London as this year's most inspiring moment. Hutchinson, a father and grandfather, was attending his first Black Lives Matter demonstration in June, condemning statues of people with racist ties. They were met by white protesters who were there to protect the statues. Clashes broke out and Hutchinson spotted an attack on a man who had wandered into the crowd. He and his friends decided they could not just stand by. They formed a cordon around the man on the ground, and Hutchinson moved in, picked him up in a fireman's carry and brought him to safety. Photos captured that moment and quickly went viral online. Only later, British Transport Police identified Bryn Male, the man Hutchinson rescued, as a former officer. Patrick Hutchinson spoke to CNN after the protest and explained what was going through his mind at that moment. "My real focus was on avoiding a catastrophe. All of a sudden, the narrative changes into Black Lives Matters, youngsters kill protesters. That was the message we were trying to avoid," he said. The other moments viewers voted on were examples of compassion, bravery and grit that brought light and hope to one of the most challenging years of our time. These are the runners-up. Before COVID-19 hit, if you didn't work in a hospital, you may not have given much thought to the shift change. Doctors and nurses would head home without fanfare. First responders would leave their stations after a long day. During the pandemic, people across the United States and around the world marked the daily shift change with deafening cheers, applause, and clanging pots. It was a way to say thank you to the frontline heroes who spent their days tending to the sick, helping families say goodbye, and holding back their own pain to keep saving countless lives. At just 6 years old, Gianna Floyd experienced a tragedy that shattered her world and woke up ours. For nearly 8 minutes, handcuffed on the ground and with a knee on his neck, her father, George Floyd, pleaded for his life. After Gianna and her mother spoke at an emotional news conference, family friend and former NBA player Stephen Jackson comforted Gianna. Sitting on his shoulders, she shared a hope for us all, saying, "Daddy changed the world at the start of the pandemic, when masks, gloves, face shields, and protective suits to keep frontline workers safe were desperately needed. The employees at Braskem America moved in and quarantined in 2 of their manufacturing plants for nearly an entire month. They ate, slept, worked and played together while producing 40 million pounds of the material needed to make life-saving protective gear. When they needed a morale boost, their family and friends organized a parade to show their love and admiration. 28 days later, the workers all clocked out together, having produced enough to make 1.5 billion surgical masks. In the early days of the pandemic, many people were finding ways to stay distanced but still connect with each other. That's when voices around the world began lifting each other up, spreading hope and celebrating life by filling the air with music. In Florence, people sang the Italian national anthem. In Chicago, they countered their sorrow with Bon Jovi's "Livin' on a Prayer." Broadway legend Brian Stokes Mitchell found an audience as he sang "The Impossible Dream" from his balcony. This summer, in the wake of the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, people took to the streets to demand justice for them and to highlight centuries of systemic racism. Millions of people across the U.S. and around the world risked their lives in the middle of the pandemic to call for justice and equality. They inspired a peaceful force of all ages, races, religions, and creeds, sending a powerful, unifying message of equality and justice for all. Man was taken into custody after he climbed onto the wing of an airplane preparing to take off in Las Vegas. A man was taken into custody after he climbed onto the wing of an Alaska Airlines plane at the Las Vegas airport Saturday. An airport spokesman said, Flight 1367 from Las Vegas to Portland was preparing for takeoff from McCarran International Airport when the pilot noticed a person coming toward the aircraft and notified the control tower. Alaska Airlines said in a statement. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and airport officials took the man into custody, airport spokesman Joe Rachel told CNN. The man had hopped a perimeter fence and was observed by airport staff around 1:40 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. According to Rachel, an image from video shot by a passenger shows the man sitting on the wing of the Alaska Airlines jetliner. Video shot by a passenger shows the man sitting and walking on the wing. He then removes his socks and shoes before trying to climb the Boeing 737's winglet, the upturned end of the plane's wing. As police officers approach the man, he slides down the winglet and falls to the tarmac below. Officers took the man into custody and he was taken to a medical facility, Rachel said. The plane returned to the gate for a full inspection following the incident, the statement from Alaska Airlines said. California activates mass fatality program over rising COVID-19 infections, buys more body bags the day after California began its COVID-19 vaccination rollout. The state activated its mass fatality program, including the purchase of 5,000 body bags. In a press conference Tuesday, Governor Gavin Newsom said the activation of the program, which coordinates mutual aid activity between state and local agencies in a crisis, is in direct response to the surge of COVID-19 cases and deaths. 60 refrigerated storage units, each more than 50 feet long, will be used throughout the state for emergency overflow for coroners and morgues. Newsom said the program addresses what he called sobering realities in the state's battle against the pandemic. I don't want people to scare folks, but this is a deadly disease, and we need to be mindful of where we are in this current journey together to the vaccine. We are not at the finish line, the governor said. California health officials on Tuesday announced the state's fifth consecutive day of more than 30,000 new COVID-19 infections. The daily average of new COVID-19 deaths in California was 163 on December 14, nearly 4 times the death rate 1 month prior. The total number of fatalities in the state is 21,188 as of Tuesday. Nationally, the death toll for the pandemic surpassed 300,000 on Monday as health officials warn of no immediate sign of abating. Hospitalizations and intensive care unit admissions in California are at all-time highs, as stay-at-home orders were enacted for large portions of the state last week. The restrictions are triggered by whether a particular part of the state has less than 15% ICU availability. The Southern California and San Joaquin Valley regions are at less than 2% ICU availability as of Tuesday, and San Joaquin Valley briefly dipped to zero over the weekend before rebounding. According to Newsom, about 3,000 patients are currently being treated in ICU statewide, intensifying the strain on California's health care system. Newsom stressed this did not mean local hospitals were completely out of space, but instead that staffing remains the most immediate challenge. He signed an executive order temporarily waiving some nurse-to-patient ratios, and the state is adding nursing staff through contract agencies, the California National Guard and California Health Corps. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is providing 80 paramedics and emergency medical technicians, and the state has requested 200 more health care workers from the Defense Department of Defense. The state is stretching resources to help these frontline healthcare workers, these nurses in particular, that are just doing heroic work every single day and asking yet again for a little bit more during these very challenging next few weeks, he said. Facebook feuds with Apple over privacy changes that threaten its advertising business. Facebook is now waging a public relations effort to attack Apple ahead of new iOS data privacy changes that would make it harder for advertisers to track users. In a possible sign of just how much the social network views the move as a threat to its core business. On Wednesday, Facebook (FB) held a press event to trot out small business as opposed to the change, debuted a new hashtag to discuss it, and placed ads in several national newspapers excoriating Apple (AAPL) for the move. In ads featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post, Facebook slammed Apple's upcoming requirement for users to give explicit permission for apps to track them across the internet. Facebook said the move could be devastating to millions of small businesses that advertise on its platform. The newspaper ads coincide with a new section of its Facebook for Business site called Speak Up for Small, where Facebook is urging small business owners to share their story and giving them a place to speak their mind. It's also encouraging small business owners to use the hashtag #SpeakUpForSmall on social media to share what personalized ads have meant to them and what it could be like without them. Facebook, and the businesses who use it for marketing, rely on data tracking to target users with personalized advertising. The social media company, which makes almost all of its revenue from advertising, warned investors in August that Apple's software changes could hurt its business. The privacy change was announced at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference in June but is delayed until early 2021. During the event, Apple teased how a user would be shown a prompt asking if they want to allow tracking, warning that the data would be used for personalized ads. Apple has repeatedly attempted to position itself as a defender of consumer privacy, describing the changes in September as stemming from its belief that privacy is a fundamental human right. Facebook, which has been criticized for its data privacy practices, is attempting to position itself as a defender of small businesses, many of which are grappling with the fallout from the pandemic. "We're standing up for small businesses everywhere," the ad states. Many in the small business community have shared concerns about Apple's forced software updates, which will limit businesses' ability to run personalized ads and reach their customers effectively. These changes will be devastating to small businesses, adding to the many challenges they face right now. The Facebook for Business website states that about 44% of small businesses have turned to personalized ads to adapt to the outbreak of COVID-19. In response to the campaign, Apple, in a statement to CNN Business late Wednesday, said, "We believe that this is a simple matter of standing up for our users. Users should know when their data is being collected and shared across other apps and websites, and they should have the choice to allow that or not," the statement continued. App tracking transparency in iOS 14 does not require Facebook to change its approach to tracking users and creating targeted advertising. It simply requires they give users a choice. In a call with reporters on Wednesday, Dan Levy, Facebook's VP of Ads and Business Products, said the company wants to sit down with Apple to figure out a way to move forward. "We disagree with Apple's approach, yet we have no choice but to show their prompt," the company said in a blog post on its site Wednesday. "If we don't, we'll face retaliation from Apple, which could only further harm the businesses we want to support. We can't take that risk." Apple AAPL declined to respond to Facebook's claims but said it is committed to helping small businesses, such as with its new developer program to accelerate innovation. The two companies have clashed before over privacy, including very recently. Last week, Facebook-owned WhatsApp criticized Apple over its move to display a summary of an app's privacy practices before a user downloads it from the App Store, almost like a nutrition label for data collection. In a statement to Axios, Facebook said Apple should be consistent across first and third-party apps as well as reflect the strong measures apps may take to protect people's privacy. In response, Apple told CNN Business the new label requirement also applies to pre-installed apps, such as iMessage, the camera and clock function. In August, Facebook argued Apple's in-app fees, such as a 30% fee for transactions that take place on apps, is negatively impacting small businesses during the pandemic. Alphabet-owned Google requires the same charge. Why a COVID-19 vaccine doesn't mean that you can stop wearing a mask. Shipments of the COVID-19 vaccine are arriving, with frontline healthcare workers getting immunized, some for the cameras, across the United States Monday. While these developments mark a historic moment and hold much promise, that doesn't mean Americans can stop wearing masks anytime soon. CNN medical analyst Dr. Lena Wen, an emergency physician and visiting professor at George Washington University Milken Institute School of Public Health, explains why. CNN: does the vaccine protect people from getting COVID-19? If so, how come I still have to wear a mask? When? This is a good question. It's important to be clear about what we know and what we don't know about what the vaccine does. What we know is that the Pfizer vaccine is very effective at preventing symptomatic illness and severe disease. That means the vaccine appears to prevent people from getting sick enough that they develop symptoms, and very importantly, it prevents people from becoming so severely ill that they end up in the hospital. This is really great news. Here's what the studies don't yet show. They haven't looked at whether the vaccine prevents someone from carrying COVID-19 and spreading it to others. It's possible that someone could get the vaccine but could still be an asymptomatic carrier. They may not show symptoms, but they have the virus in their nasal passageway so that if they're speaking, breathing, sneezing and so on, they can still transmit it to others. This is the main reason why we can't stop wearing masks right after we get the vaccine. The vaccine will protect you from getting ill and then ending up hospitalized. But it's possible that you could still carry the virus and be contagious to others. So those who get the vaccine should still be wearing masks and practicing physical distancing. CNN: does that mean we will need to wear masks in public from now on? When? No, not forever, but for a while longer. It's estimated that about 70% of Americans must be vaccinated before we get to herd immunity through vaccination. That's the point where enough people have the immune protection that the virus won't spread anymore. This means about 230 million Americans must receive the vaccine. It will take time to produce this many vaccines, and remember, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are 2-dose vaccines, so you need double the number of doses as people. Then the vaccine must be distributed and actually given to people. If all goes well, the best estimates are that it will be late spring or early summer for most Americans to receive the vaccine. At that point, we could probably see one another without masks, but not before. CNN: can this timeline be sped up? When? Already, vaccine development has proceeded with incredible speed. The fastest that a vaccine was developed before this pandemic was 4 years. We now have an authorized vaccine within less than a year. How quickly we reach herd immunity will depend on production, distribution, and the willingness of the American people to take the vaccine. There is a concern that many Americans may not take the vaccine even if it's available. We need to have a thoughtful public education campaign that's tailored to different communities. And we need everyone's help. When it's your turn, please take the vaccine. Help spread the word and convince your family and friends about the importance of the vaccine to saving lives and ending this pandemic. CNN: what about people who can't get the vaccine? Do they need to keep wearing masks? When? For now, everyone needs to keep wearing masks. There will be small numbers of individuals who cannot get vaccines. In the beginning, children won't be able to get vaccines because it hasn't yet been tested on children. It's also possible that there are some medical conditions that make it such that certain people can't get the vaccine, or that the vaccine is less effective for them. That's why the rest of us have to get vaccinated, to protect them. Herd immunity is also called community immunity. The community is getting vaccinated to protect everyone. That's also why we keep wearing masks too. We do it to protect ourselves and to protect others. Remember that even after we get the vaccine, we can spread the virus to others. Also, the vaccine is very effective, but it isn't 100%. The mask still protects you, too. CNN, would you still keep wearing a mask after you get the vaccine? When? Yes, I'll do it to protect others, and to protect myself too. Here's another way to think about the importance of mask wearing. The vaccine protects you if the virus reaches your nose and your mouth. Your body senses the virus, and instead of the virus attacking your body's immune system kicks in and gets rid of the virus. It's very important to prevent the virus from reaching your body in the first place. Wearing a mask does that. So does physical distancing. These are really important measures to prevent from getting coronavirus and transmitting it to others. You will certainly see mask wearing among healthcare workers, who will be among the first groups to get the vaccine. The vaccine is one important layer of protection for us, but we will use these other measures to protect ourselves and those around us.
នៅថ្ងៃទី 14 ខែធ្នូ ឆ្នាំ 2020 គឺជាថ្ងៃកំណត់ផ្លូវការនៃថ្ងៃជ័យជំនះរបស់លោក Joe Biden ជាប្រធានាធិបតីអាណត្តិថ្មីរបស់សហរដ្ឋអាមេរិក អ្នកបោះឆ្នោតតំណាងឬអង្គបោះឆ្នោតនឹងបោះឆ្នោតជ្រើសរើសប្រធានាធិបតីអាមេរិកអាណត្តិថ្មីជាផ្លូវការនៅថ្ងៃច័ន្ទសប្តាហ៍នេះស្របពេលដែលមានការរំពឹងខ្ពស់ថាពួកគេនឹងបោះឆ្នោតឲ្យប្រធានាធិបតីចាប់ឆ្នោតលោក Joe Biden ខណៈដែលប្រធានាធិបតី Donald Trump នៅតែជំនះមិនព្រមទទួលស្គាល់លទ្ធផលបោះឆ្នោតដែលលោកបានបន្តចោទប្រកាន់ថាការបោះឆ្នោតមានការលួចបន្លំនេះបើតាមការចេញផ្សាយដោយសារព័ត៌មាន CNNT នៅរសៀលថ្ងៃទី 14 ខែធ្នូឆ្នាំ 2020 លទ្ធផលបោះឆ្នោតប្រធានាធិបតីកាលពីថ្ងៃទី 3 ខែវិច្ឆិកាដែលទទួលស្គាល់ដោយរដ្ឋទាំង 50 នៃសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកនិងរដ្ឋធានី Washington DC បានបង្ហាញថាលោក Biden គឺជាអ្នកឈ្នះទាំងចំនួនអង្គបោះឆ្នោតនិងសម្លេងបោះឆ្នោតពីប្រជាជនអាមេរិកលោក Joe Biden បានទទួលសិលឹកឆ្នោតពីប្រជាពលរដ្ឋ 81.3 លាននាក់ឬស្មើនឹង 51.3% ព្រមទាំងប្រមូលបានអង្គបោះឆ្នោត 306 រូបខណៈដែលលោក Donald Trump ទទួលបានសិលឹកឆ្នោតពីប្រជាពលរដ្ឋ 74.2 លាននាក់ឬ 46.8% និងអង្គបោះឆ្នោត 232 រូប
The robot could help make the shipping industry greener when a ship sails through the sea. Barnacles, mussels, algae, and other organisms stick to the hull of the vessel. This process is called biofouling, and it's a big problem for the shipping industry. Biofouling increases the drag of ships, so more energy is needed to power them, increasing fuel costs and multiplying their carbon emissions. According to the International Maritime Organization (IMO), maritime transport is responsible for nearly 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. If shipping were a country, it would be the 6th largest polluter in the world. The buildup of marine life can also lead to non-indigenous invasive species being introduced to new environments. This could cause irreversible damage as these species become dominant in their new habitat and disrupt the biodiversity, an issue the IMO calls one of the greatest threats to the world's freshwater, coastal and marine ecosystems. To combat biofouling, technologies such as special coatings on ships and cleaning led by teams of divers are commonplace. But Norwegian company you.Thank has a different approach. you.Thank has developed the Hull Skater, a 200-kilogram, 440-pound magnetic crawling robot that removes the early stages of fouling. It's remotely controlled by operators in Norway, who use a 4G connection and the robot's 4 high-definition cameras to inspect the surface before using its brush to remove initial signs of build-up. Getting ahead of biofouling by cleaning biofouling at an early stage. We remove it before it becomes a problem, explains Geir Axel Oftedal, you.Thank's business development director. Depending on the size of the ship, Oftedal says inspecting and cleaning with the Hull Skater takes around 4 hours and happens between 8 and 16 times a year. The robot is kept on board the ship and can be deployed whenever the vessel is stationary and has a data connection. He adds you.Thank has also developed a special coating that is painted onto the ship to work with the Hull Skater's brush, says Oftedal. This increases the effectiveness of the technology and reduces the risk of eroding too much of the ship's surface during cleaning, which could leak chemicals into the sea, he says. you.Thank says it is the first company to combine a robot management and a coding to ensure the hull is always clean, according to Jeffrey Swain, director of the Center for Corrosion and Biofouling Control at the Florida Institute of Technology. There are challenges to managing anti-fouling technologies, as different movements and locations activate coatings in different ways. But he says robotics are the best technology we have so far. Reduced costs and emissions. Swain says the concept of proactively cleaning hulls was first funded by the U.S. Office of Naval Research in 2005, to add an extra strategy to anti-fouling coatings. However, he says coating management packages, such as the one offered by you.Thank, are a new response to increased biofouling regulations. If you take a ship to Australia or New Zealand, you're inspected, so it's better to be proactive, Swain says. It's making ship owners, or even ship charterers, now come in and start to really have to focus on how they manage the ship's hull coating. According to the IMO, around 9% of the fuel consumed by a ship is due to biofouling. In 2018, it laid out a strategy to reduce the carbon intensity of international shipping, aiming to cut the industry's carbon emissions by at least 40% by 2030. Compared to 2008, the IMO estimates that biofouling management could result in a reduction of around 80 to 90 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emitted across the global fleet per year, the equivalent in CO2 emissions of some entire countries, including Greece or Nigeria, it says. The Hull Skater, which took over 4 years to develop, was designed to help decarbonize the shipping industry. you.Thank claims that every $1 invested in its technology, including the coating, robot and offshore monitoring, will save more than $3 in fuel costs. So far, the company is on its way to commercializing its invention, manufacturing and supplying to 50 ships, says Ofted All, after unveiling the Hull Skater at a virtual event in March. It signed its first commercial contract with Swiss-Italian container shipping line Mediterranean Shipping Company (MSC) later this year. The robot will be installed on one of MSC's larger ships in China's Guangzhou shipyard. Clean hulls are only one piece of the jigsaw when it comes to delivering a more sustainable shipping industry, says Giuseppe Gargiulo, assistant manager at MSC. But a central piece nonetheless. New York bans display of Confederate flag and other hate symbols on state grounds. The state of New York will no longer sell or display anything considered a symbol of hate, including the Confederate flag, according to a bill just signed into law. Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the bill, which goes into effect immediately, on Tuesday. Introduced earlier this year, the bill prohibits the selling or displaying of symbols of hate or any similar image, or tangible personal property, inscribed with such an image, on public property. The term, symbols of hate, shall include, but not be limited to, symbols of white supremacy, neo-Nazi ideology or the battle flag of the Confederacy, it continues. The Confederate emblem has long been a divisive symbol, with some claiming it represents heritage and pride, and others arguing it represents racism. Regardless, it has become popular among white supremacist groups and is considered a hate symbol by the Anti-Defamation League. In his approval memorandum, Cuomo highlighted growing attitudes of intolerance and hate as a reason for the bill. The horrific rash of anti-Semitic, anti-African American, anti-Hispanic and anti-LGBTQ behavior spreading across the United States is repugnant to our values as New Yorkers and Americans. And a new generation now bears witness to a rising tide of discrimination, hatred and violence that threatens generations of progress, he wrote. By limiting the display and sale of the Confederate flag, Nazi swastika and other symbols of hatred from being displayed or sold on state property, including the state fairgrounds. This bill will help safeguard New Yorkers from the fear-instilling effects of these abhorrent symbols. It's been a year of reckoning for the Confederate battle flag. As Americans began to grapple with systemic racism, the flag has increasingly fallen out of favor. Earlier this year, the U.S. Navy and the Marines banned displays of the flag. Voters in Mississippi, whose state flag used to include the Confederate battle emblem, approved changing the flag to one incorporating a magnolia flower. NASCAR announced in June it would prohibit the display of the Confederate flag at all events after Bubba Wallace, the only full-time black driver on the Cup circuit, said racetracks shouldn't allow them.